Good afternoon. If everyone would like to have a seat, please do so. I want to thank you all for being here today and sharing the honor of remembering Dr. Michael Thompson. My name is Seth Carter. I'm the president at Colby Community College, and I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Thompson for the last decade. As is evidenced by the people in this room, Dr. Thompson touched a lot of lives, and I think that's very plain and evident to see. For those of you that knew Mike, he was a quiet man. He rarely told you what he thought. He never had an opinion about anything. He was complex, hard to read, and just always a very shy and reserved individual. I can give you examples over the last decade of my interactions with Mike. Few are classroom appropriate. Many have profanity. Those are all from Mike, just so you know. I want you all to know that. Dr. Thompson would commonly tell me, they're doing it wrong, but I don't care. I don't agree with them, or you, but I don't care. For those of you that knew Mike, anyone that knew he ever made that statement to you, he did care because he spent time to tell you that. One day, this is a real email I got from Mike. I'm traveling. For those of you that we work together, you know I commonly travel depending upon the time of year, and I'm gone quite a bit. Seth, I know you're traveling, but our insurance, UMR, sucks. I thought you need to tell IMA that when you meet with them later this week. That was a random email I received from Mike. No context, not why it sucked, just it sucks and you should know. In the not distant past, as in the fall of 24, Mike and I began having a conversation outside of Miss Mead's desk. For those of you that know Patty, she's stationed right out front in Thomas Hall. I walk by Mike, and he's standing there doing nothing. And as kind as I am, I don't point that out to him. I walk back from another area. I've been gone probably 5-10 minutes. I walk back. He's still standing there doing nothing. At that point, I proceed to tell him. I said, Mike, it's good to see you're still standing here doing nothing. Mike says something to the effect, I learn from the best. I don't think he was directing that towards me, but hard to say. But he tells me, he looks at me and he goes, Seth, I want you to know, when you got hired, I didn't want you to get hired. Anybody that would listen to me, I told him hiring you was a mistake. We had too many problems, too many challenges. The college absolutely should not hire you. If you're waiting for the crescendo of the story now where he comes and says, they made a mistake, we're so glad you're here, that never happened. But Mike felt it pertinent to tell me because he was very clear that hiring me was a mistake. And Mike was just such a good, kind individual. And he was always so humorous. Everything was approached with humor. Every time Mike and I talked, oh, I don't agree with that, but I don't care. For my colleagues, you know I am a part-time president at Colby Community College. I serve in a full-time capacity at the college as parking coordinator and director of safety. Dr. Thompson might be the worst parker in the history of the college. And when I say that, that's me being very kind. And by maybe, he absolutely was. Mike believed every type of terrain was a parking spot. I could walk by a sidewalk, and I would see a random vehicle there. Be like, that's Mike. You know that. It didn't matter if it was a sidewalk, grass, curb. Mike found them all. When Mike recently got a new vehicle, I was walking in between buildings, and the first thing I thought when I saw his new car, I was like, Mike's going to be pissed somebody parked on that sidewalk, because if he comes over here, he's going to be furious. For all of us that knew Dr. Thompson, he was humorous, a loving father, a purveyor of truth, a good friend, a good colleague, a great educator, and a horrible parker. I want you all to know, this is the last photo I took of Mike's poor parking. This was shortly before his passing. And the sad thing is, this wouldn't even make the top 100 list. This just happens to be the last that I have of him. Mike, it was an honor to call you a friend and a colleague. You will be dearly missed. Please don't let anyone in here diminish that memory and all the lives that he touched. I see former students, I see colleagues, and I see a lot of people that care. And that's who Mike was. Mike would never tell you how much he cared about something, but people that knew Mike knew. And I think that's evident for anyone that was close to him or anyone that ever drew his ire. Not like an administrator that works at a college. Mr. Blake told me a story about Mike. He said, how do you know if you see two administrators talking outside of a room, how do you know something's going wrong? He said, you just automatically know they're making a mistake because the two of them are talking independently. And that was Mike. Again, it's an honor to call you a friend and a colleague. Mr. Carlton, would you please come to the podium, sir?
I want to begin this portion of our time together with a word of prayer. So if you would bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we read in Scripture that you are the source of every good and perfect gift. So as we gather here this afternoon, we want to thank you for the good gift that was Michael Thompson. We enjoyed him so much, and we're going to miss him terribly. Now, as we gather here with many who knew and loved Mike, to celebrate his life in this building that he loved and on this campus, we invite you, Lord, to join us and bless us as we remember, laugh, and perhaps shed some tears at our loss. We ask that you, the God of all comfort, would be working among us, comforting those who mourn. We have also read that you are near the brokenhearted, so that we would ask that you would be true to your word, and that you would especially comfort those whose hearts are broken at Mike's passing, especially his family, his friends, many of whom were as close to him as family, and his students, his kids, and both here today and in days to come. May our memories of Mike be a blessing. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, for those of you who don't know who I am, I had the office next to Mike. I've known Mike for 14 years as a colleague, and I am a retired pastor. And when I began to teach here, I was still pastoring. My second career as an instructor here overlapped my last years as a pastor. And when I first became acquainted with Mike, for a number of reasons, he kind of held me at arm's length. And that was partly because he was profiling me. As you will learn, Mike profiled people, and he was profiling me. But there was still a little bit of a distance between us until one day in the office, something was said, I don't remember what. The doors were open, and I said some smart aleck comment. And he says, you know, for a pastor, you're really a smart ass. And I said, of course, thank you. And that began our relationship and a friendship, and one that I will always cherish. I had the privilege of being the last person to talk to Mike while he was still able to understand what was being said. He was on a respirator tube, and he couldn't talk to me, but he could nod his head. And I'll talk about that a little later, but I was asked to choose some scriptures for this service. I thought, how in the world am I going to find scriptures that represent Mike? And it took me kind of a week to figure it out, but I finally settled on some readings from the book of Ecclesiastes, some of which I know he knew. And we had actually talked about the message of the book of Ecclesiastes once. The message of it, which a professor of Old Testament shared with me, is this. Life is a riddle, but it's beyond our ability to figure out. But life is also a gift to be enjoyed. And I think Mike got that second part. And so, a couple of readings from the book of Ecclesiastes. For everything, there is an appointed time, and an appropriate time for every activity on earth. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant, a time to uproot what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, a time to dance. A time to throw stones, a time to gather stones. A time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, a time to give up something as lost. A time to keep, a time to throw away, a time to rip, a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What benefit can a worker gain from his toil? I've observed the burden that God has given to people to keep them occupied. God has made everything fit beautifully in its appropriate time. But he has also placed ignorance in the human heart so that people cannot discover what God has ordained from the beginning to the end of their lives. I have concluded that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to enjoy themselves as long as they live. And also that everyone should eat and drink and find enjoyment in all their toil. And these things are gifts from God. And then from the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 11, light is sweet and it's pleasant for a person to see the sun. So if a man lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that is about to come is obscure. Rejoice, young men, while you're young, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes, but know that God will judge your motives and actions. Banish emotional stress from your mind. Put away pain from your body. For youth and the prime of life are fleeting. So remember the Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult times come. So those are our scripture readings. I think you can maybe see a little bit of Mike in that, right? Again, he got the second part, right? I love the part that says there's ignorance in our heart, so we can't figure it out. Well, that makes sense. If the creator of the universe is telling us a riddle, what are the chances we're going to figure it out? And every once in a while we get a glimpse and we say, oh, I see why that happened. But that's usually after the fact. So we kind of experience life as it goes along. We sense there's a pattern. And because of the ways our minds are constructed, we try to figure out the riddle. But what the author of the book of Ecclesiastes is saying is, it's above your pay grade. Try one more. Your pay grade, folks. It's over your head. So don't view life as the riddle to be solved. Look at it as the gift to be enjoyed. And Mike did that. He got that part. And when I think of Mike in days to come, I will always think of a man who loved life and lived it to the fullest. Now, shortly before his final surgery, we talked about death. And we talked about the fact that he was well aware that he might not survive the surgery. And I asked him how he felt about that. He says, if it happens, I've had a good life. I've had a good run. I'm ready. Now with those thoughts, we're going to turn to some of Mike's thoughts Mike kind of wrote his own obituary. He had a wiki page in which he described himself, and he divided his life into 4 ages. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read what he said about each age, and then we'll share some thoughts from people who knew him during the 4 ages of his life. The first age of his life was from birth to beginning his career. He wrote, "Born in Oklahoma City, Mike has been steadily growing older ever since, without actually reaching maturity. Educated in the previous century at the University of Central Oklahoma, he was awarded a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology and a Master in Political Science, graduating summa cum laude. After writing lengthy sentences and papers that were hailed by professors and critics alike as containing tremendous amount of meaningless words and spaces, the Oklahoma City University awarded him a Juris Doctorate with honors. In this land of excessive consonants, Mike distinguished himself by indulging in heaven only knows what kind of carousing and not getting into nearly as much trouble as he could, should have, and would." Now, we're privileged to have Mike's sister, Kelly, with us here this morning. And Kelly didn't feel comfortable standing up. Most people talking to us, most people are not real comfortable doing that sort of thing. But she did write some things about her memories of Mike from childhood that we want to share with you. This from his sister Kelly. "Mike was my big brother with nearly a decade between us. My childhood memories of him are glimpses and snapshots, moments frozen in time that make me smile and occasionally shake my head. Though we didn't spend all my birthdays together, 2 stand out in my mind. When I was about 7 or 8, Mike promised me it was going to be a great day. I was so excited. He didn't tell me that we'd spend most of the day shopping for his first muscle car, a bright yellow Plymouth Roadrunner. He must have saved up his money from working at TG&Y, where our grandfather was store manager. I'm sure at some point I asked him why this was supposed to be fun for me. And I have no doubt he grinned and said something like, 'Because maybe I'll let you ride in it.' Fast forward to my 12th birthday. Mike told me we were going to the movies. I imagine we'd see something like Benji or Herbie Rides Again. But no, we saw Death Wish. A violent movie. I'm sorry. I thought tears would be the problem. A violent movie about a vigilante seeking revenge on the streets of New York City. You might wonder, who takes a little 12-year-old sister to such a film? But there's not even the most interesting part of that. That's not the most interesting part of the story. When I got in the car, there was a woman sitting in the front seat. Turns out Mike was on a date. And not just any date. This was his first date. He thought having his 12-year-old sister as his wingman was a good idea. I'll never know. Apparently, I did a pretty good job because he later married that woman, Susie, and the following year, my nephew, Travis, was born. Looking back, I'd like to say it was the best birthday ever. 6 years later, during the summer of 1980, Mike, Travis, and I took a road trip to Disney World. Those of you who have been on road trips with Mike may sense what is coming. A true adventure of a lifetime. If you ever had a chance to go on an adventure with Mike, you already know what's coming. It was intense. Mike had a map of the park, and over 2 days we rode and saw and experienced everything. And I do mean everything. He checked off every ride and every attraction on that map to make sure we didn't miss a thing. We were exhausted. I'm not sure Travis and I were convinced that it was really the happiest place on earth. Finally, I've always known why Mike came to Colby, but I didn't understand why he stayed. Over the past month, as I've looked around and visited with some of you, I get to know. This was his home, and you were his family. Well done, brother. Well done. Thank you, Kelly, for telling us a little bit about Mike. And it confirms what he said, that he never quite matured, though he grew older. Because the Mike you knew in many ways was the Mike we knew as well. The next age of his life was the age in which he became an adult and went to work. He says, my second age is me as an adult, responsible for upholding the laws and traditions, ensuring the continuation of our tribal customs. In my second age, I strive to earn my place in the adult world of responsibility, seeking to enjoy security, status, and other external markers of achievement. I spent my second age as an active adult working, protecting, and developing my tribe. This was a time of establishing my own family and social interests, activities, and ties to the community. I was using the knowledge I had gained from the generations that were here before me and gaining my own experience to share with those generations to follow. Through my varied accomplishments, I gained a sense of and a recognition for success in my chosen professions. We're privileged to have someone who knew him well during this season of his life.
I've been told to hold this thing like an ice cream cone, so. My name's Jim Davis. Most of you, very few of you in here know me. I can see we have a lot of people involved in law enforcement over here. The first time I met Mike, it was because I had gone to visit a friend of mine by the name of Monty James, who worked with the City of Mustang, Oklahoma Police Department. And I had just gotten out of the Army. I'd spent 6 years as a military police traffic accident investigator. And before I had done that, I had been a warehouseman in Denver, Colorado, and I got out of the Army and figured, well, I'll go to work in a warehouse somewhere and spend a couple years there and go to college on the GI Bill and get out and make something of myself. Monty took me in and introduced me to Leroy Cinnamon, who was the chief of police. And Monty and I had known each other in the Army. We'd been stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas together. And he introduced me to Chief Cinnamon, and Chief Cinnamon offered me a job. And it was a small department at the time. It's not so small anymore. So I accepted his offer, seeing as how I didn't have anything any better at the time. And the next day I had to go in and be interviewed by the lieutenant in charge, and that was Mike. And we were talking to each other, and Mike says, well, can you do anything except traffic? And he said, just to get to know you, I'd like to have your opinion on what the most important aspect of law enforcement is. And I said, well, of course you always have traffic, and you have patrol, and you have investigations, and you have public relations, and you have administration. And not one of them is any more important than the other. Because if you're missing any of those, then you're not a complete department. He thought that was a pretty good answer, and I told him I'd give him 2 years, and after 2 years I was going to go my way, and 36 years later I retired from there. I can recall we were on patrol one day and stopped a car for a minor traffic violation, and the driver had a warrant out for him for some criminal event. I think it was a fraud or something like that at the time. Anyway, we ended up taking this person into custody, and the guy's sitting in the back seat of the patrol car, and he's saying, "Why are you taking me? What have I done wrong?" And of course, if you're going to take the person to jail and there's nobody else in the car, you have to impound the vehicle, which means you have to do an inventory. And the guy's shouting out the window at us, and in the back seat was a bag of barbecued potato chips. So Mike yells at him, he says, "Aside from the warrant, it's for unlawful possession of barbecued potato chips." And he takes them out and he throws it on the hood of the guy's car. So we take him down to the Canadian County, Oklahoma jail and book him through because it's a state warrant, and that's where you take people who have a state warrant. The following week, we had gone down to the district attorney's office to file some charges. And the assistant DA who had been in charge of the arraignments when they arraigned this particular fellow was a little confused, and he wanted to know from us where this person got the idea that he was being arraigned for possession of barbecued potato chips. It said that it thoroughly confused him, the assistant DA, and the judge was having a hard time with it too. And of course, Mike and I looked at each other. I guess the 60s was good to this guy. That's the best we could come up with. That's kind of what it was like working for Mike. You never really knew what he was going to do. You always knew that whatever it was, you might end up having one of those severe talking tos by whoever it was that was above us both. But it wasn't going to be too serious. It was always going to have some factor of humor in it. And he always interjected or tried to interject humor into what we did. He was the main motivating person to get this small department some training, some education, to try to get people to come and stay and to make it a career. He had gone to the command management school, I believe it's in Dallas. Was it Dallas or Houston? I forget which it was in. Dallas. And he'd also attended the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia. And I wasn't able to get an appointment to command management school because, quite frankly, it was a better school than the National Academy. The National Academy always claims to be the best, but command management, I understand from Mike, was considerably better, and he'd been to both, so I take his word for that. But he was the motivating force for me to apply for that, too. So I got my opportunity in, I believe it was 1999, the 197th Academy. Had he not enforced how important that was a privilege that I never would have had because I wouldn't have asked for it. Oklahoma, and I don't know how many of you people understand this, but the number of people who get to attend the National Academy is based upon how many congressmen you have in Congress, in the House of Representatives. When I went, there were 12 officers from Oklahoma that got to go. A lot of people put in for that. I suspect that he had written a letter to the training officer of the FBI office in Oklahoma City, and that's one of the things that got me shoved through there. I was not a college graduate. They want to have college graduates at the National Academy. But I got in, and and I found it a very fulfilling and learning experience. And the acquaintances that I made actually even helped us to solve cases. There was a case that involved some international activity that I used a contact that I had made in Egypt, an Egyptian officer who had attended the National Academy. There were officers from Sweden and from China, Taiwan. Chicago wasn't represented. They had been barred from the academy for 5 years for doing something underhanded to get somebody in there. I was kind of hoping Mike hadn't done anything like that for me. But in any event, the City of Mustang Police Department ended up with more National Academy graduates than any other department in Canadian County, Oklahoma. And we were not the largest department in Canadian County, Oklahoma. The Yukon Police Department and El Reno Police Department were bigger. Not by much anymore, but then they were. But in any event, I just thought I'd share some of that. I understand entirely why he came to Colby and why he stayed, because he was committed to training people. It's the most important thing for him. He took an interest in people, and I will miss him very, very much. But I also believe in the life after this one, and he and I will meet again.
I love silver maples. They remind me of my home place. Things didn't go as planned. I love silver maples. They remind me of my home place. I love silver maples. They remind me of my home place. Things didn't go as planned. I was out of position and had to act fast. A blinding flash, a loud bang. And lying on my back looking up. I love silver maples. They remind me of my home place. Things didn't go as planned. I was out of position and had to act fast. A blinding flash, a loud bang. And lying on my back looking up, I felt a tremendous jolt, like electricity running through my body, but no pain. Everything seemed to recede into the distance. It's hard to describe the feeling of weak helplessness from the weight of a crumpled body as I lie in a massive pool of my blood. Time and space collapsed into a single frame. I knew immediately what had happened, the tearing sensation. The hot, wet feeling on my head and face, the nauseating smell of burned gunpowder, taste of being numb, dazed, with the consciousness of being badly hurt, I tried to sit up to get off the wet, filthy floor, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Not being in pain was a relief. There was something about my blood mixing with the filth that disturbed me. Most people who are shot in the head with a 44 Magnum don't survive very long. I wondered how long I had lived. Minutes, hours. My limp body heaved upward as the woman I was lying on top of was pulled away. She was crying hysterically, covered in my blood. I asked if she was okay, but there was no sound. I tried to speak louder, still nothing. Silence was deafening. I realized others were talking to me. Just looking at their faces, I knew how serious my injury must have been. My eyes started losing focus, and for a brief moment, I believed I had been killed. My thoughts were probably conventional. My son, past experiences, hoping the woman was okay. Angry that I would die because of meaningless mischance. I thought about the guy who shot me, crazy bastard. Should have killed him before he killed me. I felt sorry for my partner. The other Thompson paramedics formed line, desperate to save my life, reminded of their own mortality. Suddenly, pain burned through my body like a fire. I knew then what the others did. I wasn't dying. There was too much pain. Dying couldn't hurt this much. And I wasn't ever afraid. So I suppose real dying thoughts might be very different. I remember thinking, this is going to hurt a lot and for a long time, and I'll try. On the floor, being frantically poked and prodded, I was incredibly tired and wanted to sleep. My eyes felt like they were bulging, my temples pounding, and over the protests, the world became dim and no door. My thoughts turned my grandparents' home where I grew up, my home place, on the silver maple in my garden. I love silver maples.
Now at 10, an officer hurt and a woman is safe after a frantic call to 911.
It was a good day. Nobody died.
The third age of Mike's life is really divided into two parts, academic and family. The academic part of his life was about this. My first experience with teaching was in the police academy, and that would not be the movie, but the real thing. Since I had gone through instructor development training and fulfilled the requirements to be certified as an academy instructor way back in 1983, I began to teach legal seminars in 1996 and enjoyed the change so much that by 2000 I had begun teaching law to a very eclectic group of students at City College. In 2001, tired of the competitive blur of big city life, I decided to move to rural northwest Kansas, a major cultural change. I began teaching and administering the criminal justice program at Colby Community College. The program was in danger of being discontinued. I was asked by Dr. Michael Airy, then CCC president, to see if it could be salvaged. I saw that the program needed an infusion of modernization. It lacked depth, but after a few adjustments to the curriculum, some help from other faculty members, the program grew rapidly.
Well, as you can imagine, it's very difficult to try to sum up Dr. Thompson years here at Colby. And so as I was thinking about what stories to tell, what to share, some of you who've been here for a few years or maybe in the club of a lot of years, some of these stories you'll get on a little bit deeper level. Some of you know the stories. There's a lot of details I couldn't include because I kind of still want to keep my job. A constant conversation we had from day one was he would tell me, I wasn't looking for this job when I got it, and I have a retirement fund. And I would say, well, I was looking for this job, and I still haven't earned my retirement fund. And that went on for all of our years together. That I had to remind him of that. And then a lot of what I'll share is I just tried to hold some space for each of you to have your own memories and stories with that. So his journey, it began in August of 2001, and my first memorable encounter took place in the Fireside Lounge, where new hires were gathered for orientation. I don't think those of us in that room knew just what we had in store for the day, or let's just say for the years ahead, right? The day kicked off with the infamous icebreaker activity, the meet your neighbor, and then introduce them to the group. Dr. Thompson's unlucky partner for the activity was Nicole Sharman. She was the new hire in the missions department. And when their turn came, his introduction went something like this. It was somewhat of a blur, I'm sure, for her too. But it was, she has 4 children, all of whom she's birthed before the age of 20. Right? He delivered it with a straight face, completely matter of fact, continued to embellish her story without missing a beat. Nicole and I don't remember exact details, probably because I was too busy processing the shock on her face, while at the same time, Dr. Thompson had a captive audience paying attention to him. And true to form, he never tacked on a just kidding. He didn't crack a smile. He just simply sat down, kind of leaving us all just to sit and wonder what had happened. But looking back, I realized at that moment, this was a small glimpse into what lay ahead for the years to come. As Nicole, who still works here today, her name has changed. Years later, she did have 2 children, right? For some of you are starting to put it together. But for that moment, it set the tone for Dr. T's unique personality. A blend of sharp humor, unexpected mischief, and a knack for seeing how people would react. I spent quite a bit of time sitting with other faculty members just thinking about how to reminisce about him. And that was one of the things that was shared. And one said, I wasn't sure how to take Mike at the very beginning, which was a common comment, right? He seemed to like to say things just to see what kind of reaction he'd get. I think that perfectly sums up much of our time with him, always saying something to see the reaction he would get. Now, I had the privilege of working alongside with him and being mentored by Dr. Thompson for his entire time at CCC, witnessing firsthand his 3rd age of life, as I was entering what he would tell me later was my 2nd age. And after what I can only assume was his signature profiling, he chose me as his rookie partner. And anyone who worked closely with him knows that he really never could turn off that profiling part of his brain. He was always profiling anyone he met, all who he encountered. My first initiation was a trip to California for a CJ conference. Now let me set the stage here, because with Dr. Thompson, as for with many of you, nothing was ever quite simply as it seemed. When you agreed to something with him, you rarely got the full details up front, or you most likely would not have said yes. He was always up for an adventure. Oh, was always something waiting to unfold. Now, and to understand what I mean, you need to know what he wrote about his love and adventure in his e-portfolio. He said, I learned to spin, balance, weave, dodge, and frolic in search of adventure that are ends into themselves. J.R.R. Tolkien once wrote, not all who wander are lost. That sentence revealed to me the secret ingredient that fuels my daring and self-discovery. Be it urban, ocean, jungle, or cultural expedition, travel has provided me with the ultimate life experience. And if you knew him, you knew he wasn't kidding. He truly believed in the power of travel and adventure, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. He loved sharing those experiences, and especially with his kids. And by kids, I mean not only the students he mentored, but also his coworkers who spent enough time with him to be adopted into that ever-growing family of his. So back to the California trip. When he invited me, and Seth, long time before you, so it's not your responsibility, okay? It sounded like a straightforward professional trip, attending a conference, networking, the usual that I was learning about this world of academia. It was, but after I agreed, right? Not until after, it turns out this wasn't just a conference. It was a full-blown student expedition, yet to be revealed to me. We'd be taking students to visit the LAPD Academy, Border Patrol, and a host of other law enforcement. With the budget that was set for 2 instructors to fly and attend the conference, he made other plans to fit with the budget constraints, a minivan and 1 hotel room. Oh, and here's the kicker, the qualification to join the trip. You had to have never left the state you were born in. That was for the students. 5 students immediately qualified, with 1 more squeezing in simply because they wanted to go, and he wouldn't say no. And of course, we were off. Now, that meant we'd be road tripping across the country in a 7-passenger minivan. For those of you doing the math, yes, that's 6 students, me and Dr. T. Spoiler alert, math was never either of our strong suit, as evidenced by the envelope stuffed with receipts. Rookie mistake, never let him track the expenses. The overpacked minivan was intentional, but not a mathematical error. Dr. T always wanted as many people as possible to experience everything they could and squeeze every ounce out of life. The adventure started with a bang, or rather with Dr. T's announcement that we'd be spending the night in Las Vegas. This can't be good. He can't be serious. He's trying to get a rise, right? Nope, he was right. We were off to Vegas. I made the rookie mistake of offering to drive. As someone familiar with navigating the chaos of the Strip, he let me, but what I didn't realize that would officially make me his designated driver for the rest of the trip and for the rest of our years together. He quickly discovered that due to my previous life, I could handle it, and he explained it as, or described me as, I surpassed the stamina of a truck driver. Those are his words. The trip itself, well, let's just say it was an experience none of us ever forget. The overcrowded minivan and hotel room, those alone were unforgettable, but believe it or not, they were minor compared to the days and nights we were filled with, none of which I can share further, right? But we squeezed every ounce out of Mexico and California. On the way home, we drove straight through. That was my choice. We were not stopping anywhere. We were getting home. It was quintessential Dr. Thompson, right? Packed with adventure, chaos, humor, lessons learned along the way. I pulled in, I wondered if I'd still have a job, if this was my last semester at CCC. But it wasn't about just the trip. It was about the journey, the people, the stories, everything we gathered along the way. And of course, we all had plenty of stories. Now, as the years went on, so did the trips. If you knew he had an expedition company. As Daniel shared, he'll forget the time he went 50 hours on a bus with him to New York City. And whether it was New York City or Mexico, all the trips were as chaotic as memorable. And those are the words of Daniel. And he had a knack for finding locals as tour guides, sharing about that, and those tour guides would provide experiences that you couldn't get otherwise. He also enjoyed sharing about his own personal travel and bucket list. He was a storyteller in the purest sense. He didn't just tell stories, he shared his life. Every tale he told was woven with humor, heart, and hard-earned wisdom, whether it was about a challenge he overcame, a lesson he learned along the way, or just a crazy cop experience that was just a good story. His stories were more than entertainment, they were connections. And his love for storytelling grew even deeper when he discovered digital storytelling. It was a natural fit for him. He combined his love for technology with this incredible ability to craft meaningful narratives. He found joy in creating digital stories, mixing media, voiceover, and visuals to harness the power of what he would call a good story. If you knew him, he wasn't about to stop at ankle-deep water in anything he did. Oh no, we were diving in the deep end head first, and this is how he went about most things. And if you worked with him, you knew you were diving in with him. Then it led to building a studio in his basement, one in Bedker. But what made this even more special was how much he loved and pushed us to share this skill with others. He wouldn't let us keep it to ourselves. He believed in helping others discover their own voice through digital storytelling. He and I had the privilege of teaching people from all walks of life how to tell their stories using this powerful medium. This passion was also brought to the classroom, challenging students to use their digital storytelling in their assignments. It wasn't just about the technical side, it was about helping them connect with their own experience and share those connections in a meaningful way. For him, it just wasn't an assignment. It was a way to help his students discover themselves and share their lives and the world. And that's what we saw a little bit ago was one of his really personal, he didn't publish or put that one out on his wiki, but that was one of his stories of when he was shot in the face. And if you didn't know, that's why he had a beard. You never saw him without a beard. Well, it was from that encounter. Beyond storytelling, he had a remarkable gift for conversation. He could talk about anything with anyone, and for long stretches of time. Many of us fondly remember stopping by his office, or the times he might pop into ours and get swept into a discussion, whether it was the whether it was the latest challenge at the college, or maybe a student, a political debate, or something entirely unexpected, and most likely a little bit of everything. You always walked away with something, a new perspective, a lesson, or simply just a great story. He had a knack for diving into the topics most people still are clear of, and polite company, religion, politics, you name it. And he was never afraid to play multiple roles in the single conversation. One moment, he was the mediator, calmly navigating both sides. The next, he was the antagonist, challenging your thinking, pushing you to see things from a different angle. Somehow he could do both in the same discussion. His conversations and stories weren't just limited to the office, but in the classroom too. He shared legendary stories and offered valuable wisdom and insight into the topic being studied. He had an incredible way of blending humor, curiosity, and insight into every interaction, making most conversation very engaging. He is known for the lounge-like setting of his office. The chairs in his office were rarely empty. Regulars could often be found there, engaging in discussions that were as entertaining as they were enlightening. He had time to talk to anyone about anything. He was often described as brilliant and even genius, and that was true. But for me, what stood out most was he was a very deep thinker, and he was dedicated to being a lifelong learner. He didn't just love knowing things, he loved learning. Whether it was a new concept, skill, idea, he embraced it with curiosity and excitement. A huge void I feel is, and I think many of you probably do, is we're not getting the text or the emails that said, have you read this? What do you think? What has your experience been? Or the ones I used to get frequently would be, I signed us up for this. We leave on Monday. He was an innovator, always ahead of the curve, especially when it came to technology. He had this knack for seeing potential in tools and ideas and how to use it in learning. We spent many hours and drove many miles together, diving headfirst into this world of educational technology and online learning. Remember, tipping his toe in the water was never his style. We experimented, we failed, we succeeded. For him, failure was just part of the process. Inevitable, yes, but also necessary. Remember him saying, be scared of neither. He would say, this philosophy defined how he approached learning in life. What we gained from those experiences, he didn't want to keep to ourselves. If someone asked for help, we went, whether it was presenting at a conference, teaching educators, or simply sharing what we knew. From that, the Delta Star Academy, the iStep program, and Axio were all built to impact the classroom, projects he was proud of. When it comes to technology, I'll never forget one of our earliest memories of him advocating for me. One of the reasons I think I fit his profile of an acceptable rookie partner was my pursuit of technology and learning, and not being afraid to try what no one else was. I wanted classroom technology. At that time, brace yourself, it's a long time ago, it was a laptop and a projector, what we called an EKI, something that back then was unheard of. I was the first instructor to request it, and he championed my cause, while at the same time he pulled back the reins. I remember him saying, I'm talking to the president and the dean about this, but you have to think this over. The college may not realize it, but this will benefit them more than it will benefit you. He also warned me in his ever-wise way, you're gonna find yourself working beyond Bedker's walls and far outside of work hours. That is what laptops are meant to do. He said it with a warning that he wasn't stopping me, but that I needed to know. He knew what was coming before I did, as in most situations, but young and naive, I pushed through and he paved the way for me to do it. The funny part is that they wanted to padlock the laptop to my desk or to when I took it into the classroom for security reasons. Again, he mediated and explained why this defeated the purpose, for me only to have my laptop stolen. It gets better, right? A case he should have solved way before, but he overlooked the obvious. The initial suspects were students, but in the end, it was the janitor who had come in and announced to he and I in our offices that the laptop that was in the classroom was no longer there. Thompson never solved that case, something I still poked at him about, because eventually the laptop surfaced on its own when the janitor's stash was found. The janitor had been stealing and hoarding things from many different rooms. Right? Again, there's probably only a few of you in here who remember, right? I did have fun with that. Captain Obvious didn't see it. That's who he was. He was a forward thinker, a problem solver, and someone who wasn't afraid to push the boundaries for the sake of progress. His brilliance wasn't just in what he knew, it was in how he used his knowledge to uplift others and to push them. He was a problem solver. If there was a problem, it lit a fire in him to figure out how to fix it. The bigger the problem, the harder he worked. Sometimes well into the night. It wasn't unusual to get a text or an email from him about a project or issue on a weekend or in the middle of the night. He was relentless in his pursuit of solutions. But here's the thing. If his advice or his insight wasn't sought out, he had no problem sitting back and letting things unfold. I frequently heard with his signature humor, "I love a good train wreck." And he'd watch the chaos and amusement detached from it, sometimes requesting popcorn. He was a mentor to so many. For some, like myself, he filled that role for many years, shaping not just our careers, but our ways of thinking and approaching challenges. For others, it may have only been a brief moment, a conversation, a piece of advice, or even a nudge in the right direction. But those moments carried lasting impact. Either way, he was there when you needed him, ready to listen, guide, encourage. He was in so many ways also a protector. He had this innate gift for pulling people under his wing, even if only briefly. It didn't matter if you were a colleague working alongside him, or a student sitting in his classroom, or even a former student reaching out through Facebook or email. If you needed someone to stand with you, he was there. When the occasion called for him to defend or protect, he never hesitated. He stepped up no matter what the situation and made sure those around him felt safe and supported. One faculty remembered, "As I got to know him better, I enjoyed the challenge and allure of the unknown. What might he say next?" But what I quickly realized, that he was a safe person. He cared deeply about others and how they were impacted. I felt like we had a protector, a father figure, not just for our division, but for each of us personally. I think that was well said. That was the essence of who he was. He didn't just lead, he shielded. He made you feel seen and valued, and in his own way, he let you know that no matter what, he had your back. At the same time, he had this very special ability to believe in others so much that we convinced ourselves that we could do what seemed daunting to us or beyond our ability. He helped people see their own value and potential, often before they could see it themselves. Michaela put it beautifully. She said he had a knack for finding the inner calling of almost every student, and I would add colleague to that, and guiding them in that direction. He'd cheer for you when it felt like no one else was, and he'd push you to become everything he saw in you. He didn't leave room for self-doubt. If he saw something in you, he made sure you did too. And if you didn't know how to do something, well, that wasn't a problem. He wasn't selfish with his time or knowledge. One faculty member remembered that in her early days at CCC, she said, "Mike was incredibly helpful and accommodating when I started in my position. He'd come up to the building during the summer to meet me, help me get instructor accounts set up, share insights, help me get started." But of course, if it was summer, you needed to know it was no pants. Not until the fall semester, in service was the official day that most of the time the no pants zone ended. In the classroom, he was in his element, and his students knew it. One of his trademarks was the ridiculous nicknames he'd come up with for them, nicknames that typically stuck whether they liked it or not. His love language in the classroom was sarcasm, teasing, jokes, and the occasional, let's call it frequent, well-timed insult. Canadians? Well, and particularly, they seemed to get the brunt of it. Though, let's just tell, that stemmed from his own deep-rooted frustration that he could never set foot in Canada again. But that's another story, another time, another place. He was also known to start the class by boldly declaring, "I don't like any of you, and you can't make me like you." Okay? It sounds harsh, but if you knew him, you knew it was just part of his charm. But in this semester, most students absolutely loved his class and the way he taught. Well, some settled for just liking him, and others left a bit disgruntled. But love him or not, his impact in the classroom was undeniable. And teaching, well, he'd teach anywhere but the classroom, if he could help it. Whether it was a round table right here in this area, it was very fitting for us to have this here, because he would choose the couch and the beanbags, or over a plate of pancakes at Village Inn. He knew that the best learning didn't always happen within the four walls. I've spent countless hours trying to figure out a way to explain what it was like to have him as a teacher, but for those of you who didn't get a chance, but honestly, words fall short. It was one of those things where you really had to be there to understand his humor, sarcasm, ability to push you just enough. It was all part of an experience that's impossible to replicate. What's more, his care for his students didn't end when they graduated. He followed their journeys well past their time in the classroom, often bragging about his kids and letting them know just how proud he was for them. For him, teaching wasn't just about the subject matter, it was about the people. And as many things go, if you know, you know. He had a way of leaving his mark in an unforgettable, unique way. Let's start with the socks. Right? If you notice Daniel's attire today, socks always unique, often from his hospital stays, and paired with sandals in a combination only he could pull off. And while his casual go-to attire seemed to be the typical recently, you should know that there was a time that he had pride in his array of suits and ties, and it wasn't unusual for me to get a text before we were presenting of, what color shirt? I really think you should wear these color shoes because I'm going to wear this tie, right? Which is a lot that recent students didn't see in him. And of course, his favorite was the Grinch mask, which he wore with much joy. The pirate flag was always present in his office and those in his circle. The thoughtful gift to his close colleagues, the damn it doll that Linda just can't bring herself to use. But we're going to help her with that. The thoughtful reminders, the well-timed flowers, medallions, books, or meaningful text or email that might contain an encouragement or a loving insult. His meme game was unparalleled. His wit was razor sharp, and his humor absolutely legendary, especially on Facebook. He had a knack for bringing people together, whether it was for Friday lunch or that conversation that had no end. As I look around this room, I know that each of us carries a piece of Dr. Thompson with us, whether it's a lesson he taught, a story he told, or a comment that left us scratching our head. Or maybe it was the way he made us felt seen, valued, capable of more than we ever thought possible. He had a way of leaving a mark, of planting seeds of curiosity, humor, wisdom, and they'll continue to grow after today. But his legacy isn't just the lesson he taught or the places he traveled, but it was in the people he mentored. He believed in, he inspired his kids, his colleagues, his friends. So today, let's honor him by carrying that legacy forward, by finding the adventure in the journey, the humor in the unexpected, and by rocking some quirky sandals, maybe carrying your damn it doll around, giving a loving insult, or flying a pirate flag in his honor. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for the stories, the lessons, the laughter. You're missed, but you're always going to be with us.
Thank you, Krista. If you catch her in the right mood and in private, she might tell you what happened on that trip to Mexico. I meant California. And she would have to be sure that you couldn't get her fired before she would share those details, because some of them, I don't know that the statute of limitations is completely run out. Listen, I think you all have stories like that. When we're done today, there's some cookies, and stick around, have a cookie, talk to someone, share some of your favorite moments with Mike. Now, the third age continues, family. Mike wrote, with my role in my family changing, and through a shifting career and work focus, I looked more deeply within myself to find that which gives me a sense of meaning, purpose, and passion. This is a time when, from the vantage point of long and varied experience, I can take particular note of what is really important to me and how I want to spend the time remaining to me. Now I can revisit, reclaim some of what I neglected along the way, clear out unwanted baggage, heal old wounds, and see where I want to grow to become more balanced and whole, both as an individual and as an integral part of the immense web of life. As I do this work involving mind, heart, body, and spirit, I am able to make more intentional choices about how I want to live, how I want to contribute in order to make a difference as I mature into the fullness of my potential. And there's someone who knows quite a bit about this time in her life. So Jennifer, if you'd come up and share with us.
Thank you. Oh, I had the honor and the privilege of being married to Mike for 10 wonderful years. Before I go into my portion, a couple of comments going back to some of the other things said. Krista was at the college before I knew Mike. So he was already very close to her and embracing her and loved, the fact that she was in the school, and they had a very great relationship. And then Mark came along. And he comes home and he tells me, "You're not going to believe this. The president of the college has brought his pastor in to teach, and I just don't know how I'm going to handle this. I cannot believe it. I don't need a pastor down the hall from me telling me what to do." He quickly learned that Mark was a very wonderful person and embraced him, but he was not impressed at first. Mike encouraged me to get my master's degree, and I did complete my master's degree. And they began interviewing Seth for the presidency at the college. And Mike comes home and he's like, they've got this young kid coming in who's got a master's degree. I don't need some kid with a master's degree telling me what to do at work. And I said, "Well, hon, why should work be any different than home?" And he just gently nodded his head and continued on. So I can share, while Mike would probably strike me down if I did, he was very impressed with Mark and very thankful to have you as a colleague. And he did think Seth is doing has continuing to do a wonderful job. So it always cracks me up. I don't need some young kid with a master's degree telling me what to do. Well, guess what? You got it at home too. So, but as Mike was struggling with his health over the last several years, we had a lot of conversations about this exact moment that we're sharing right now. He didn't want a service. He didn't want a funeral. He didn't want anything. And I'm pretty sure he's probably not impressed with us gathering, but you know what, get over it. You got to do lots of things with me you didn't want to do. But as we were planning this, as we were all visiting, and actually what Mike told me was, if you're going to do anything, have a roast. I want you to have a roast. So I told everybody who was going to be speaking, you have to tell funny stories. There has to be laughter. That is the best way that we can honor him. And he loved to laugh. He loved to make others laugh. And he loved to find humor in difficult times. And it helped us overcome a lot of difficult times. So I've spent a lot of time trying to summarize our life together, give you guys, just a little glimpse into kind of how what it was like. So I tried, honestly, as we were starting to get together, to scare him away. I had 3 small children, and he was retired from one job. He loved to travel. He loved to do all of these things. And I'm like, look, I have 3 children who are required to live with me by law. They cannot just be left behind. Social services will get involved. And he's like, no, I understand. And he embraced them and loved them as his own. And that is something that I will never forget. When very early on in our dating relationship, he was helping me out. Kids were on break, and I had to work, and Carson was young. I think he was about 6, just learning how to read. And he was playing a video game, and Mike's sitting there with him, and these words start scrolling up on the screen. I don't even know what game it was anymore, but these start scrolling up on the screen. And we all know Mike was very, very educated, very intelligent man. So these words are scrolling up, and Carson looks over at him and says, "Can you read?" He's like, "Yes, I can read." So here's my highly educated Juris Doctorate, argued in front of courts, and he's got a 6-year-old putting him in his place. The girls also always brought a nice twist to things. we'd been married for a while, and he was downstairs in the basement. The girls' rooms were down there, and they were laughing in Courtney's room and joking around and having fun. And Mike sat there thinking, wow, how great would it be to have a sibling close in age like that, to grow up and to have memories together and to do things with. And he said he no sooner finished that thought, and out came, I hate you. I hate you too. You get out of my room. I don't like you. So needless to say, that wasn't the last time the girls helped us realize that having a sibling close in age was not always as glamorous as it might seem. So there was obviously a big age difference between Mike and I, and Mike always loved to explain this to people in his general humor, and he would tell people that I was not as young as I looked and that I had had a lot of work done. And I would tell them that he had also, but his just didn't go as well. Oklahoma was a very special place to him. He spent most of his life there, and really had a love for Oklahoma City. And so when we were getting engaged, he decided it should take place in Oklahoma City, or in Oklahoma at the lake house. So in March, it was over spring break, he decides we're headed down to Oklahoma City for the weekend. Well, we got one of those great spring blizzards that was mostly ice. And we take off after I get off work, and we're driving 30 miles an hour on I-70. The wind is blowing so hard, it's so slick that like the wind would blow and the car would slide into the other lane just from the wind blowing. And we had no traction at all. And I am very certain we are going to die. And I'm like, you know what, let's just stop, go off in the morning when it's light. He's like, nope, it's going to be fine. We're going to get there. And in true Mike fashion, we drove all the way through, 12-hour trip because of the roads. He assured me when we turned south at Salina, the roads would get better. It did not. And I was just certain we were going to die. So we get to the lake house, we have a great day and stuff, and we're going out for supper that night at this really great Italian place. And but he's like, oh, let's stop at this park. This is where the Dalton gang hideout was, and, it's really cool. And so it snowed. I'm in a dress and heels. It's cold. And he's like, well, come out here. And I'm like, I do not want to walk through this park in my dress and heels. It's cold. Let's just go eat. And he's like, you can tell he's very irritated that I would not follow him out in this park. He's like, well, come out here on the bridge, and you can see where the hideout was. I'm like, fine, whatever. So we get out there, and he's like, so that's where it was and stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's really cool. And then he pulls a ring box out to propose. And he opens up the ring box, and he starts to tell me, how he feels about me and life together and everything. I don't even remember the exact words. And he opens up the ring box, and he goes, and so I want you to wear my FBI ring. He was like, no, here's the real ring. He was so nervous. He couldn't pull off his own joke. And so I accepted the ring, and I said yes. And I'm like, so does that mean I don't get your FBI ring? And he's like, no, you don't. Krista referred to Mike as Dr. Thompson a lot, Dr. T. And I can remember very early on, he officially and had fully earned the title of doctor, but he didn't really like to be called doctor because he was really afraid somebody was going to show him something that he didn't want to see, and they were going to think he was a real doctor. I couldn't not talk about his love of animals. He loved dogs, especially, but just all animals. And I can remember him telling me that after the Katrina disaster in New Orleans, that he donated money to the dog rescues because the people were fine, they'd figure it out on their own. But he wanted to help the dogs because he didn't like people, so he wanted to help the dogs. So our dogs were very much a part of our family and very spoiled. And after we lost Murphy, who she was a very much an alpha dog, for all 6 pounds of her. And he would often cuss her for just being so stubborn and stuff. And he'd grab her up and, Murphy, blah, blah, blah. But he would never, like, redirect her or try to train her or anything like that. Murphy had fully trained Mike. And so we'd lost Murphy, and we were looking at getting another dog, and he wanted another Maltese, and okay. And so I'm thinking we're going to find a nice Maltese that we can train. And he's like, well, we got to make sure it's got personality. And I'm like, oh, okay, another dog with personality. This is what I'm dying for here. And so we found a dog with personality, and we had an ongoing debate to the very end about who wanted the dog with personality. And so something would happen with Miss Elsa, the new dog, and he would say, he's like, well, you wanted a dog with personality. And I was like, yeah, no, not so much. So, and then he actually went and picked her up, and so I'm like, well, you brought her home, so it's all on you. One of my favorite things about Mike that we talked about him moving here from Oklahoma City. And he was really used to, you knew your little circle in Oklahoma City, and you didn't really venture outside of that a whole lot. And he moves to Colby, and everybody knows everybody. And if they don't know you, they want to know why you're here and how you're connected and want to know you. Or they're asking around about you to find out. And so he really, really never ever got used to that. After we got married, he would go in somewhere, or he was actually at a Rotary luncheon, and he was talking about the criminal justice program and giving a presentation on it and stuff. And so he went through his education, his training, some things about the program, just kind of a brief introduction. And he said, but most of you probably know me as, changes the slide, and it's our family picture, Jennifer's husband. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we know who you are. And so he embraced being Jennifer's husband. So, but then he would be out, like at Starbucks getting a coffee, or maybe run to the store every once in a while, and somebody would be like, oh, hey, Mike, how are you? How are the kids? What's Jennifer's up to? And he'd be like, fine. How do you know my name? Why are you talking to me? And I would get a text with a picture of somebody. How do I know this person? Well, you sat on a scholarship committee with them, or they're a friend of mine, or they were in one of your classes. And that never stopped. That continued up to the very, very end. Oh, Mike was good at a lot of things. He was a lifelong learner, as Krista said. He wanted everybody to be lifelong learners. He could not do a home repair to save his life. And I was responsible for all of those. Whenever we were working on a project at the house, his responsibility was to go for sonic drinks. And if I really needed to keep him busy, I would send him to the hardware store for a left-handed screwdriver. Oh, he's still looking for that, I'm sure. But he actually embraced that he was, he should never do any of that. When we bought our house in Wichita, the realtor told him, she said, okay, now they're going to come and they're going to show you like where all the shutoff valve is and where the different things are and how to change, the furnace filter and all of that. And so Mike, you'll want to be here for that. And Mike's like, why? And he looked at her and he said, why would I be here for that? And she goes, well, you'll want to know that. He's like, no, Jennifer does that. You don't want me touching anything. Oh. One quick story about a trip. The first time we went to Mexico, we were at the resort and we went into town for an afternoon, or for the evening, and just to kind of experience some time off the resort. There was this beautiful Catholic church overlooking the ocean, and adoration was taking place. And so we went in for adoration, and they were setting up the altar for a mass, and so we were getting ready to leave. And Mike read a little bit of Spanish, and I read a little bit less. And so we get outside, and he goes, well, they're going to have Mass here at 7 o'clock. Why don't we just stay for Mass? And I said, no, we don't have to. He's like, well, no, why don't, we could stay for Mass. And I said, okay. So we stay for Mass, and we go back in and we sit down, and they're setting up the altar, and I'm like, something doesn't look right. This isn't right. Something's not right. And it turned out it was a wedding. So those little adventures on the trips, we crashed a wedding. We sat on the groom's side. We never did agree what the groom's name was. So by the time we realized it was the wedding, we're like, do we leave? Is that rude? Do we just stay? Is that ruder? So that was fun. Oh, he had his bucket list. We had things we accomplished together. We made a lot of memories. We had a lot of laughter. He instilled a passion in so many of us with education, with learning, with travel, with new experiences. And I think that's something we should all take away and keep in our hearts. He's someone, there will forever be a hole in our hearts. And I read something earlier today that you're told that grief gets better in time and that the pain gets better. But your heart just actually builds up that scar tissue so you don't feel it quite so much. I just want to thank everybody for the love and the outpouring that they've shown to all of us, to his colleagues, to his students. And we just know that there will never be another person as amazing as him. So thank you. Courtney's going to share.
For those of you who don't know me, I am Mike's daughter, Courtney. And my younger siblings, Rachel and Carson, and I decided to kind of combine our stories together to honor Mike. Whew. There are so many ways we could describe Mike. However, we just wanted to touch on a few things that stood out throughout the years he was in our life and will continue to shine through for the rest of our lives. Mike was extremely easy to talk to. We could talk to him about anything, and he would always listen and never judge. Whenever we talked to him about something stressful or an obstacle in our life, he always made everything seem easier and made us feel like nothing was in our way. He had advice about everything under the sun and would do anything to help out his kids and grandkids. One of his favorite things was when his granddaughter Olivia would call him and ask for his help with her papers. And he loved to brag that she would mostly just be scrolling on her phone and nodding her head into the call. Or when his granddaughter Caroline would call him and hide in her closet so she wouldn't have to do her homework or clean her room because she couldn't get in trouble if she was talking to her grandpa Thompson. We loved to joke that Mike was this big, scary police officer and no one could mess with him, when in reality, he was just a giant teddy bear with the biggest soft spot for his kids and grandkids. One time, we were getting ready for school, and in true teenager fashion, Rachel was having a meltdown because she was having a bad hair day. And she was crying that she couldn't go to school because her hair looked terrible. Of course, our mom was not having it and insisted she still go to school. You would think Mr. Tough Guy would also insist Rachel go to school, but instead she got her way and got to stay home because there was no way he could send her to school when she was so upset, even though she was being just a little bit dramatic. It's hard to believe we'll never be able to ask Mike for any other advice again, listen to him tell any more stories about his police officer days, hear stories about Travis growing up, listen to him brag about his granddaughters and how much he loved them, or hear him say how proud he is of us. We know deep in our hearts that he would want us to continue living our lives to the fullest, and we will do our best to continue making him proud for the rest of our lives. One thing that has shown so much throughout this celebration of Mike's life, and I'm sure that everyone knew about Mike, was his humor. And in order to honor him and his love for laughing, we wanted to share a little story that he loved to tell. Growing up, the little community pond was across the street from our backyard. Every day during the summertime, Carson would go to the pond and fish and would literally sit there from dusk till dawn, or dawn till dusk, or whatever. Mike had bought walkie-talkies so he could communicate with Carson while Carson was fishing. One day, Carson starts yelling and screaming into the walkie-talkie. Mike's rushing to the car and yelling at Carson through the walkie-talkie, saying, "Carson, what's going on? Talk to me." And of course, Carson's just still screaming, won't tell him what's going on. So Mike peels out of the driveway, trying to get there as fast as possible, panicking that Carson hooked himself or something. Mike pulls up to the fishing spot, and Carson is jumping up and down, screaming, "This is the biggest fish I've ever caught." It took hours for Mike's blood pressure to come down again, but at least Carson had caught the biggest fish ever.
Thank you, Rachel. By the way, Jen, I knew that, what you said, because he told me. You know, he said to Seth, "I think it was a mistake for you to be hired." There came a time he told me the same thing. But unlike Seth, he said, "I was wrong." I don't know what that means, but so yeah, actually I knew that, and so I wasn't one of those that he just said, "I'm going to mentor this guy," but he did it anyway because he forgot that I was listening. And so both with him and Krista, I watched and listened because they just threw me in the deep end and said, "Swim or you're going to drown." And by watching and listening and paying attention, and they were cordial to me, and when I'd ask questions, they'd answer. And I think they gave me the right answers most of the time. Krista did, I'm not sure about Mike. But we got through it, and in time, we became fast friends. A little bit more about that, just a little bit, because I'm going to be the one that wraps things up. Talks about his fourth age. He says, "In my fourth age, I will review and revel in the fullness of my life with no regrets, and prepare for whatever comes next. As I approach this age, I have an ever more heightened awareness and growing acceptance of my mortality that leads me to peace and the joy of surrender. All of my life is in one sense a preparation and a prelude for this approaching stage of life. Therefore, by growing to my full potential and living fully in my third age, I will enter even more completely and wholly this stage of completion. But not yet." But when he wrote this, of course, it was a ways off. I think it is safe to say that Mike successfully finished the fourth stage of his life. He enjoyed a lot of success, and I think this was among the successes that he enjoyed. Mentioned that he said, "I don't want a pastor in the office next to me." That's interesting because I've been thinking about my relationship with Mike, and there came a point in the last couple of years when looking back, I think I became his pastor. And we talked about serious stuff. And, I thought, okay, I went from this guy that he had suspicion of and maybe thought I'm not going to like him to someone he grudgingly came to say, okay, I think I may like him, to finally thinking I can cut up and have some good times with this guy, to I like to talk to him, I like to argue with him, I like to discuss things with him, and to the point where he wanted to talk about very serious things. And we talked about life and death. And I think, and I think Krista will agree with me, I think he sensed it was coming. He realized his body was wearing out. And though he continued to enjoy life to the max, he no longer had the capacity to enjoy it as fully as he had once enjoyed it. I want you all to know, his former students, many who are here, he was so proud of you. He called his students my kids, and some of you really were his kids. He was terribly shaken recently when one of his kids had an untimely passing, died early. And that was extremely difficult for Mike, and we had some talks, a lot of talks about life and death in connection to that event. And the reason, it wasn't, a former student died, it was one of my kids died. Because he called you, his students, my kids, because that's how he thought of you. And I want you three in particular to know how very proud he was of you. He bragged on you all the time, and you talked about making him proud. Understand that he was proud of you. And I want to tell you something about death. I've had a lot of experience with it. In 40 years as a pastor, I cannot tell you how many people I have sat with as the hour of death approached, and how many funerals I've officiated. But one thing I've noticed, even when people are supposedly in a coma, I have come to believe they know a lot more about what's going on than we realize, because I've seen them hold on until someone they wanted to be there got there. And I've talked to Krista about this too. She told him at the end, he couldn't respond verbally. She thinks also he knew that all you guys were coming. And I'm absolutely convinced he waited till you got there. He wanted you to be with him. One of those last conversations I had with Mike, the one I referred to earlier, where he talked about having had a good life and a good run, he began that conversation by saying, I don't think I can die. He says, I've been shot 4 times, and I've had last rites 3 times. And we had a good laugh at that. And I hate to say my last conversation with him was not what I wish I'd said more. I wish I'd spent more time. But the hospital staff were upbeat. And they were giving me the impression that he was doing better. And my thought was, he's going to do it again. The guy has 9 lives and he's only used 7. He's got 2 more to go. And so I really thought he was going to get better. He looked terrible, but you want to talk up big. I said, Mike, you're looking better. He looks up at me, tube out of his mouth, like, are you insane? And so I didn't spend as much time as I would have liked to spend with him that day. But I did think to myself, he may not make it. And what am I going to tell him? Well, I talked about Mike, about spiritual matters. And in his final years, Mike didn't attend Mass as much as he once did. He told me, though, he says, for me, adoration is something I think speaks to me more than the Mass. Now, some of you are not Catholics, and so you may not know what an adoration is. But for Catholics, adoration is a devotional practice that involves praying in the presence of the Eucharist. And for Catholics, that's the body of Christ, so it's in the presence of Christ. And so it is a way of worshiping God, understanding that you're in the presence of Christ. And Mike told me he did that often. And knowing his background, he had actually some Baptist input. In Oklahoma City, he said he went to an evangelical church just because he liked the fun music. So he had that influence for a while. But, you know, what do I say to him? Well, whether you're Protestant or Catholic, there's a verse in the Bible we agree on, and you can broaden that circle to include all Christian denominations. A statement made by Peter, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And so my last thing I said to Mike was, Mike, this is a time in your life when you need to be praying that prayer you have said over and over again through the years at Mass. And he nodded his head in agreement. So though he couldn't talk, I'm very confident he said that prayer, and through the magic of AI, I thought it might be good for you to hear him say that prayer in his own words, in his own voice.
Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, have mercy on me. Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, grant us your peace.
Good prayer, huh? And I take comfort in the fact that he nodded his head, and that Scripture says God understands our thoughts from afar, so you don't have to verbalize it. And so I have confidence that his colleague in crime, in fighting crime, had, that I will see my friend again. We're told that we Christians are not to mourn as those who have no hope. And because of prayers like that, we have a confidence that death, as awful as it is, and it is awful, is not the end of a relationship, but an interruption. And with that thought in mind, one more time I would like to invite you to bow your heads and pray with me. Heavenly Father, you've heard the words that have been spoken here today. More importantly, you know the thoughts that we're thinking, and you know the need of every heart. We're never more aware of just how weak we are than when we face the awful reality of death. The death of a loved one, and the reality that at some point we'll have to face it ourselves. But we're comforted as we face this reality by the words of our Lord, who said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even if he dies, and the one who lives in me, lives and believes in me, will never die. Now, as we read in the Scriptures at the beginning of the service, Mike's spirit has returned to you, but we're left to carry on. Inspired by his example, grant us the wisdom to see our life as a precious gift to be received and enjoyed with gratitude and joy. And may our memories of Mike, though they are painful today, may they indeed become a blessing to us in days to come. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord, we pray. Amen. Let's stand together for the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you and give you peace. Amen. You're dismissed, and do feel free to stay, have some cookies, and talk.
For those of you who are students or former students, if you guys, where should you meet at, Michaela? Let's go, just come up front. We're going to try to get a picture of all the students who are here. So if you guys will come up front.